We're live. Awesome. Okay. Hiya. How are you doing, Carlos?
Very good, Steph. How are you doing?
I'm good. You're just saying before we started the call, it's a bit busy. I don't know what's happening. I was on the phone to someone else and they were like, I'm just in meetings all the time, like a customer. And I think something's in the air. Everybody is like active at the moment. Spring is coming. Everybody wants to do work. And so there's a lot of meetings happening.
I know.
Busy times, busy times. So today, before we get started, I'm going to do two little announcements, and I will probably mention these at the end if we have time as well for people that join later. So, two shout outs we have. Number one, friends of the show, the FinOps Foundation, have started a new podcast, and I'm just going to share the link. The chat. They haven't asked me to promote this. I listened to it yesterday on my walk. Check it out. It's called the FinOps Pod. It's only got one episode at the moment. It's brand new. So add that to your subscribe from wherever you get your podcast. Recommend kind of listening to it and engaging with more people in the foundation. So that was number one. And then number two, I mentioned this very briefly at the end of last week. I am going to be probably mentioning this every week for the next couple of weeks, but I am at the London Summit speaking about cloud ops. So if you are in London, you're coming to London for the summit, come say hi, come see me speak if you like. Even if you don't come see me speak, if you see me in the crowd, like say hi. You can register now for free. It's a great event. I used to go every year when I was a customer, so really recommend doing that. Okay, let's actually kick the show off. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your spend at AWS. My name is Stephanie Gooch, and I am a commercial architect at AWS in the Optics team. And today we have Carlos. Carlos, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Carlos Galan, and I am a member of the Cloud Financial Management team within AWS. I'm a business development manager, and I guess our mission is to help customers to track, to optimize, predict, pretty much control and govern the cloud spend on AWS.
Awesome.
Mm.
So our big thing we're looking at today is basically around chargeback, but a very specific solution for chargeback. So we're going to be covering a bit of background about what chargeback is when we've seen it with customers, but more specifically, we're going to be talking about a solution that is the application cost profiler. I'm just making sure that I say that right. I was going to just use the initialism, but that's not what it is. So that is a cool new service. We're going to do a demo kind of halfway through this episode, Carlos is. So stick around for that. And any questions, comments you haven't, please feel free to put them in the chat. We always love to hear from you. We like to know what's going on. If you have any suggestions for what you'd like to see on the show coming up, then please feel free to email us at costoptimization@amazon.com. So let's dive into this. Maybe do you want to give a general explanation of kind of what chargeback is for those people
Sure.
who maybe aren't used to it?
Yeah, chargeback or showback, cost allocation. Usually a key practice that we do for efficient operating workloads in the cloud, and it enables you to define pretty much who pays the bill, right? So within the organization. And so you can perform the showback, which is just, this is what it is, or chargeback, where you actually charge each of the individual, let's call it specific entities within the organization. Can be business units, can be services, environments, etc., right?
Awesome.
Yeah, that's what it is pretty much.
Nice. And this is a common thing we see a lot of customers do. When I was a customer, my main job in charge of FinOps was to do chargeback. That was my bread and butter. It was setting up the systems around it. And before tools like the one we're going to mention today existed, it was me kind of writing Python scripts and using the cost niche report, or as we refer to it as the CUR, to do these things. So it is top of mind for a lot of our customers. So let's touch on some kind of best practices. I've mentioned kind of account structure. So if just off the bat, what are a couple of good things people to know about when it comes to chargeback?
Sure. So I think the typical sort of best practices we recommend usually is number one, you can use the right sort of AWS account structure, where anything that is within the account can be allocated into a single entity, right? So you can think of an account as almost like a folder. Anything within the folder can be very simply allocated just to a simple entity or organization, part of the organization. Then if you need a little bit more granularity within a specific account, you can use the cost allocation tags, right? Which allow you to allocate a specific sort of tag or a mark to a specific resource, like an EC2 instance or an S3 bucket, where you say this resource belongs to this service and this other one belongs to this other service, right? It's just to gain that more granularity within an account.
That is the kind of foundation level. Guys, if you are in charge of account structure or want to, that's just, it's like the best thing. I always bring this up, is like, this is how to make things a little bit simpler. So that splitting of accounts, like you will have different folders. That's a great analogy. I like that. Is really easy. And if you are thinking, okay, I want to use that information when I do my chargeback, handy, I'm going to throw my lab in here. Barely like 5 minutes have gone by. I've got to tell my lab. So there's a lab in here which can allow you to go and get that data. So the account level information, so the kind of account names and stuff like that, if you want to put that into your cost and use report for easier chargeback. So yeah, starting off with accounts, then going into tagging. So what are some common challenges that you've seen with customers when they start to dive into this world of cost allocation?
Right. So after you sort of digest these two initial structures, which is pretty much what we say like level 1, then you come up with sort of a level 1.5 or 2 challenges along the way, which is when you have shared resources or untaggable spend lines, right? And imagine an untaggable spend line like such as enterprise support, right? And usually for this, there are some sort of recommended static or rough methods to do that, to split the bill. And it can be something like an equal allocation or a usage-based allocation or spend-based fixed percentage. It's very simple, but it's you can call it a rough way to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so that's kind of like some higher level things. I think some ones that we often see are when people are kind of sharing applications, right? That can be often a challenge that customers see.
Correct. Yeah. And then you would dive from number 1 to level number 2, and now you're going to level number 3, which is at the end of the rabbit hole. And not the end, but it's pretty much somewhere there. And where more and more organizations are actually moving to a so-called shared infrastructure models, right?
Right.
Where you have, let's say, multiple entities or tenants, which is also known in the industry, which are sharing common infrastructure. And these are called multi-tenant applications.
What's like an example? Do you have any kind of just a generic one that you've seen before?
Gmail, right? So potential, right? So it's just a software as a service, or Salesforce. You have a service and you have multiple customers underneath it, and they're using the same resources underneath, right? So it's pretty much that is the sort of model, like the model like an ISV, for example, would have.
Okay. So if I was to think about, please correct me. So it's like, imagine you've got a box, there's something on that box that loads of people want to use, and you want to distribute that cost to all the people that are using it. So everyone who's getting access to like that single resource, spreading that cost around, basically.
Yeah, and I think the classic example is a service provided by an API, right? So you call an API, and beneath the API, you can have a tree of resources which are being used by a multiple number of tenants who have access to this API and the API key and whatnot.
Right. Okay, cool. All right. So, and for those who maybe have joined us in a bit, we're just talking about cost allocation. And what we are now going to focus on is hopefully a solution for you with your cost allocation. So Carlos kind of highlighted this tool to me. I didn't know it existed before obviously we had a chat before today's episode. But he came to me and talked about this new application profiler. So do you want to give a bit of a run through of what this service is before we go into our demo?
Sure. So before touching into that, let me just quickly explain.
Oh, yeah, go back.
No. It's a perfect intro. So it's pretty much why it exists, right? So if you have a shared infrastructure that you want to understand the cost allocation per tenant, you have originally or usually 2 options. You can either invest heavily on engineering, on infrastructure resources. So you do sort of querying logs in multiple sources to try to have that sort of marrying those pieces of data together from different sources, which is quite complicated, but if you need to do it, you do it. Or you can settle for something more, again, static and rough, like dividing, for example, the total cost of your infrastructure by the number of the users that are using it, like very, very, very simple, no? Or you look at the gigabytes of data that are stored for each independent tenant. Maybe you can actually look at that. So there are like different ways to do it, right? And for a number of months now, we have the solution called the AWS Application Cost Profiler, which comes to the picture. Right? There you go. Thank you.
There you go.
Very nice intro. And you have so it's an online service pretty much that allows you to view the cost of your resources broken down by tenant. That's what it is, right? Again, same example. You have an ISV that has an API, and each API call triggers an infrastructure below, regardless of which customer calls it. So you want to understand what is the cost associated with each of those tenants that have triggered this API, for example.
Right. And so you've mentioned tenants a couple of times. Do you want to explain, what that actually means in kind of layman's terms?
Right. So tenant is pretty much when you talk about shared infrastructure, it's pretty much you're saying it's because you have a number of different users or entities who are making use of that sort of pool of resources, and those entities or users are called tenants.
Okay.
That is
cool. All right. That's good. Okay. Good to know. Okay. So what does the actual application tool do?
Right. So amongst the benefits that it has, obviously it reduces the investment in this sort of telemetry by trying to get this data, because AWS cost profiler, application cost profiler will take some of that undifferentiated heavy lifting for you, right?
Right.
And out of that, you can produce cost insights to drive better pricing decisions or chargeback models, because now you understand who is spending on what, how much.
Okay, cool. So it gives you that, like you were saying, that kind of level deeper of information, so you can do that, which is great. I think, going back to kind of what you mentioned earlier, when we did a lot of our chargeback, it was just kind of, you sent a number and you divided it up by X amount of people. So the fact that you can be more granular with this is something that I'm seeing my customers just to mention this before we go into the actual demo. So I got one of my customers, I've started to do chargeback now, and they haven't needed to before. They didn't show back to tell people what they were spending, but now they have to do chargeback. And so people now really care about those tiny costs. They really care how it all adds up. I know when I was a customer, people did count the kind of pennies. They want to know exact usage, because that's why you're on the cloud. You're on the cloud so that you're not bulk buying these massive servers and accepting like a finite, like this is X amount every single month. You're here for the flexibility. You're here for that changeability. So you could take advantage of that exact costing. And that's why we have things like the Cur. Before we do that, I think you wanted to say one thing it didn't do before we jump into the demo. Is that right?
Right. So it's very important. So what it doesn't do is it doesn't track the usage of resources by the tenants, right? So what it does, what it requires as an input, and this has to be provided by the application owner, is precisely that breakdown, right? So for example, if you have let's say an EC2 instance that has a spend of between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. of A, let's call it, right? And during this time, you have two tenants that have used this instance, right? Tenant B has used it for 10 minutes, and tenant C has used it for 20 minutes, right? So this sort of marking the user needs to provide. So you need to include in your application a way to measure the amount of time that has been used by each tenant. And there are a number of ways to do it. What the application cost profiler will do is take this information and look at the AWS bill and say, well, if the cost during this hour has been A, and this tenant has used it for 10 minutes, then I'm going to attribute to this tenant 1/6 of that cost for that hour, if that makes any sense.
Okay, so you have to provide that separation logic, but it does the calculations for you.
Exactly, that's what it is.
Okay,
so that's just a quick distinction on what it does and what it doesn't. But
yeah. No, good to cover. Okay, so do you want to dive into the demo?
Sure. Let me just pull up something here.
Make sure your screens. While you're doing that, just for those who are wondering, who are in Europe and are confused about why we're on air an hour earlier, or are surprised to see us here, hello, if you're new to the show, because of the American time zone differentiation. So America moves their clocks earlier than Europe does, or at least England does. So we are on today at 2:30 4:30 rather than our normal time of 3:30. So if you are new to us and you want to come back and watch us, just this week and next week we're on an hour earlier. Normally we're on at 3:30 GMT. So just to let everybody know that in case they're wondering what's going on. Okay, ready to share your screen?
Yeah, it should be there.
Okay, let's do it.
There you go. So pretty much this is the console. So there's some things to know about obviously application cost profiler. Is first of all you need to configure your setup, right? And this is something that you do only once when you want to start using it. So the first thing there's three things within that sort of group. Number one, you need to create an input S3 bucket, which is pretty much the place where you as an application owner are going to put the individual files required as input for the application cost profiler, right? Then you also need to set up the output S3 bucket, which is where the application cost profiler is going to put the reports that actually after doing the processing. In this case, you will see, let me just, I have used the same S3 bucket for both, right? Just for simplification, right? But you can obviously, depending if you have multiple areas, you can have any setup that you want, but it's pretty much you have a report here. And you can see here, I'm not sure if it's big enough you can see, but you have pretty much two folders. One is called the import and the other one is called reports, right? So within the import is where you can put your files, and then in reports is where you're going to get the report from the application cost profiler, right? And the last step for setup is you need to actually set up the service. So we're going to go to the application cost profiler. And this is very simple to do, right? All you have to do here, as you will see, is just to click here on manage configuration. And this is what you need to provide. Just a name for the report, right? A description. You're going to put here the S3 bucket that you want the application cost profiler to put the reports on, which is the output that you just created, bucket that you just created. Yeah. You put the prefix, so reports. So now you know that this is a folder within that bucket all the reports are going to go into. And finally, you decide the frequency of these reports, daily, monthly, or both. And then obviously the format, whether that is on a CSV file or a Parquet format. Right? Very simple to do.
Yeah, I assume if you use Parquet as well, that means you can plug it into Athena in the end.
For example, Athena or just the glue. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's absolutely cool. I like the fact that there are these two options now. That's so if you want quick results, CSV, but if you want to pull it into any other reporting you have, like any other co-reporting, or if you want to attach any of the data to it, you can go into Athena. It's pretty cool.
Exactly. Right. So that once you have your setup done, then it comes the harder part, I guess, of trying to. It's just pretty much you need to provide the data, right? So you want to capture the data, and you do this on an hourly basis. So every hour you provide a file with all the accesses that these tenants have had on the applicable resources. Application Cost Profiler supports things like EC2, like Lambda, ECS, your classic sort of compute platforms. So you can actually have that. So you need to provide on a file, as you like, very high level, obviously who the tenant is, what the resource is being used. You need to be very specific about the resource, because then that information is going to be used to track the cost of the resource and then obviously apportion it appropriately, right? And very important, the timestamp to understand what has been the time of the usage within that specific hour. Okay.
Right.
And usually the input is a CSV file. You can just put it there on your input bucket that you configured before, and you're done. And you do this on an hourly basis. When you do that, you need to let the application cost profiler know that you have a file ready for them.
Okay.
Right. So what you do is you call an API that the application cost profiler has, just called the import application usage. Right. So you pretty much say, I have this file in this location, go. Right. And it will take it, and then depending on the frequency, if it's daily, monthly, or both, then it will take the corresponding files and create the report when it comes the time to do that, right? What else we have here? We create the report. Okay, that's it. Now I'm going to show you an example of how those files look like. I'm going to change the screen quickly.
Yeah, sure.
Not a problem.
Yeah, I'm keen to see what these input and output files look like.
Yes, it's very simple. Actually, I'm going to show you an example from using Lambda, right? Which is a very simple use case. When you have a, should be this one. Hold on. Just give me a sec. We can just show the screen. No, window. Oops. Share. Okay, let's go.
There we go. The fun of doing something live. Oh, you might need to zoom in a little for this one.
Is it zoomed? Yeah. Oh, yes, I need to zoom this. Yeah, sorry about that. It's super.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
There we go. Yeah.
Right. Oh, sorry, this is the output file. But let me just talk about the output file, and then we can go back to the input one. So the output file is going to tell you, in your account, within this hour, right? You can see this is like the 14th of March between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m., right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the tenant identifier. So what I've done here, to explain you, I have used one of the blogs that we have on examples of how to use Application Cost Profiler, and it uses an application based on Lambda. It's an API gateway connected to a Lambda, right? So that's what it is. And you can include the tenant. So what I've done is called a Lambda function 6 times, just as a test, right?
Mm-hmm.
And within these 6 times, I have used 3 different tenants, right? So tenant number 1, 2, 3, which is the one that you see here, has called this infrastructure 3 times. Then you had 4, 5, 6 that has called the infrastructure 2 times. And then you have this other third tenant, which is number 7, 8, 9, has called this infrastructure only once, right? So you have 6 calls.
How can you tell that it's 1, 2, and 3?
Oh, you can see it on the input file. I can show you, but I'm just.
Okay.
Yes, so this is just the output.
Yeah.
This is just the output. It's like giving you, this is the sort of final pie, cooked pie.
Okay.
Yeah. And what it does, it shows you which is the product, and which is the usage type, which is the gigabyte per second. So that sort of usage bit of the Lambdas. And then you can see here the attribution, right? So within those 6 calls for this same Lambda function, it's the same Lambda function in this hour. So you can see that 50% of the time, roughly, has been attributed to the first Lambda, which called 3 times out of 6. So that makes a lot of sense. Then 33%, which is 1/3, given to the second tenant that used it 2 out of 6. And obviously 16.6% to the other one, right? And what it will do is, now that you have this this breakdown, it will match it to the corresponding rate, and then it's going to give you the actual cost per tenant, which is what you're looking for, that output, right?
Right. So the rate, did you provide that? I know you're going to do the input in a second. Is that in the input or is that from the cur?
It's just from the cur. It's just automatic. Okay. The only thing that you need to provide in the input is who the tenant is, what particular resource has it used, and then obviously start and end time, so you can do that thing. You might find the not, I don't want to say weird example, but it's a real example. Yeah. That a resource has not been utilized at some point during that hour. It's normal, right? So you cannot. Ideally, we want to have 100% utilization of our resources, but it's not the case. And in those cases, the application cost profiler will also be able to give you something called unattributed, right? So it's going to say this percentage, this cost has not been attributed because no one has used this resource during this hour as well.
Okay, interesting. So you can kind of, that's an interesting concept itself, because sometimes when we see this chargeback, people like to just split the cost out. So something we mentioned at the start was that you might have, say, your application costs $100, and then you have 10 users, they use it at different times. You might just split it up, so everyone pays $10. But if you're right, if someone's using it a lot more than others, and you want to charge them more, so you can do it proportionally. But if no one's using it, then there's that question: do you charge them for it, or do you absorb that cost? And that can be quite a challenge. And then it makes it, I guess, that's when optimization in general comes into play more and more, because if you've got a massive, I don't know, so this is a massive EC2, and I say massive, it's a large EC2, maybe it's an M5 2x large or something, and that's not massive, but a large instance, and no one's really using it, maybe you need to think about, okay, do we need to turn this into auto scaling? Do we need to turn this into a Lambda function? Do we need to look at scheduler? So just that concept in itself can be probably really eye-opening to the fact of unutilized time. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you will see that in the case of B2C applications, we tend to use things like unit metrics. So you take the entire sort of cost and you divide it by the number of, because it is your dependence on a specific tenant is much less, because you have a B2C, you can have millions of users. But for an ISV that can have a much smaller number of users, like in a B2B case, then it is more important to understand what is the actual cost per tenant, because you may have situations where you can have like 3 tiers, right? So this is the heavy user, medium user, low user. So that's when it comes very, very in handy.
Definitely. And just, I didn't throw up there when you were doing it, but this is the link to the blog. So if you want to go and have a go at setting this up in your account, having a mess around with it, we'd also love to hear if you have any feedback, or if you have successes or want to learn more about it. That's the link to the blog. And as always, if you have any questions, cost optimization, amazon.com, feel free to reach out. And also, I would really like it if we want to get more customers on this show. That's what I want to strive to do in definitely in the next season. So if anybody is not just use this service, but if they want to come on and talk about how they're doing cost allocation, I'd be really interested to know. So we've got a couple of minutes left. We wanted to talk about pricing just before we finished, right?
Right. So pricing. When you enable the application cost profiler, you will have a free tier, right? It's going to be for the first month. So so the way that it is built based on the size of that output report on a monthly basis, right? On a gigabyte. Okay. So then the normal, so it's called on-demand rate for this service is at $5 per gigabyte of that output report. But on that first month, you get that free tier of 30 gigs, which are for free for use. And then obviously, if you use the first month, you have 80 gigs of your output report. Then 30 of those are going to be free, and then you pay for the other 50. Simple.
Cool. Nice and easy. Awesome. All right. Glad we got that covered. Okay. So last couple of minutes, anything you wanted to share, point out about kind of cost allocation in general, or the tool itself before we finish?
Sure. I think it's good to understand that this is obviously it's a good tool to get that insight, but also covers only a number of resources. So as a general practice, it is always good to question yourself. Do you really need to share infrastructure, right? Because that poses a challenge when it comes to allocation. So you can still use your folder, right, your AWS account structure before, if you can. Some ISVs, I have seen that they open a new account for a customer, right? And they have a bunch of resources on that account, and it's very easy to allocate because it's just everything in the folder goes directly into the customer's bill or within their cost allocation, right? But then if there's anything shared beneath, there needs to be a fundamental business reason for that, I guess. That's just my last comment.
No, I think that's really good. I think it's typical infrastructure setup where you have an account for every environment and an account for prod, dev, test, but you also have that separation of accounts for customers or applications or projects, and identify those with tags at the kind of account level. You can split it across, but the shared infrastructure was always our biggest challenge when I was a customer, and distributing those costs. So if you can do it, obviously don't, if there are some things that make more sense to be shared resources, like a Jira server, that's the first one that comes to mind, is something that we had deployed for our entire team. We're not going to make one for every single individual project because it's a lot of licenses, a lot of setup. Okay, cool. All right, this has been good. I mean, I'm looking forward to going and playing with this tool more and kind of talking to my customers about it. So thank you for sharing, Carlos. So that's it from us this week. Next week, we are having one of the owners of Snapshot come on, and following our last conversation on kind of the basics of Snapshot, we're now moving into EBS Archive and the recycling bin announcements that happened at reInvent. So we're going to go deep on that. So check out last week's episode if you are going to come next week, just so you can get a bit of background. And have a good week, everyone, and we'll catch you next week.